Hi there, ladies and gentlemen. In this video I'm going to be talking to you about the Spawn Revamp design document that was posted up on Reddit 2 weeks ago. I'm going to talk about the impact it should have on the game, and I'm going to make some suggestions about how it can be made even more effective and change more of the game itself. Really good to see some transparency from the dev team. We've very rarely seen a design document posted up before, and although this has been edited to make it more forward facing, it is really good to see, and it comes on the back of 4 months of developer live streams, which has again lifted the curtain on what's going on. Now, the actual suggestions themselves, some of them are very subtle and won't make a huge impact, but when they're all together, especially with some of the larger changes, which are quite bold and quite, I'm going to say daring, of the dev team, it should make a huge difference. Now, overall, the feedback on Reddit has been really positive. There's 300 responses, and very few of them are negative. There are a few, of course, but most of them, if they are going to be negative in any way, are constructive with some ideas about how it could be improved further. But overall, really good. Now, in this video, I'm going to talk primarily, as I've said, about what the impact of the bulk of the changes are, and then I'm going to go into some suggestions towards the end. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about is the priorities and conditions. Now, I'm not going to go through in detail all the individual changes. I'm hoping that everyone has read that document, and I will provide a link on YouTube that takes you directly to it. Now, with the priority system, it's going to support primarily squad cohesion. There's going to be no impact to squads being able to get with the rest of your team. But what it does do is it funnels players into the reinforcements needed system, and it also supports people with joint combat, and joint combat itself then supports balancing fights. Now, the primary thing that this priority system is going to do is it's going to punish overpop right at the tipping point of 55%, where you're going to get the differences really kind of snowballing from that point onwards, and that's really good. Now, the Priority 2 and Priority 3 with the 30-second and 60-second timers, that accounts for using, well, logistics vehicles, Valkyries and Galaxies, which would take that length of time to get places, more often than not. Now, that's good. It, of course, means that you don't have to pull those vehicles, which is a shame, to be honest with you, because it means that the air game will suffer as a result, but it does mean that people don't have to waste their nanites if all they're interested in is the ground fight, as many players are for one reason or another. Now, with the Priority 4 system of essentially cutting off spawns in places that are, well, cut off from the warp gate, that's going to make it all the more important that people think strategically and, well, don't let places get cut off, because that's going to make a huge impact on the defenders there, because they are going to be stuffed, plain and simple. Now, along with this priority system and the condition system, they talk about restricting fight pop, and that's a good idea. It will help spread players around the map. That will improve fight variety, because no longer will you only find fights in 2 or 3 places. You'll find it at almost every single lattice link up with the opposing empires, but it'll also help balance, and it'll also help with performance, because rather than having these super massive fights in areas and those are your only real options, everyone's going to be more spread out. So obviously with less players, less vehicles around you, you're going to have a better time performance wise, and for many players that will mean that they can play the game effectively, because a lot of players cannot get into the game because if it's a big fight, they're stuffed. Their computers can't handle it. Now, next thing I'm going to talk about briefly is reinforcements needed changes. For starters, they're going to encourage and support medium-sized fights, which is brilliant, because that's where PlanetSide really shines. The small fights are fine, but one player pulls a max and the fight's essentially shit on, as is if somebody decides to bring a battle gal or something like that. But it also doesn't support the super large fights, where quite often reinforcements needed is not going to help, especially now that Zergs are going to be penalised with the priority and condition system. Now, one interesting thing with this is that defensive markers are actually going to have an impact. Lots of people believe that they do already in the game, but of course the reality is that they don't. It's just something that you place, it looks shiny on the map, it might draw people's eye, but it doesn't actually affect anything. You don't get any extra XP or anything else if you fight in those areas, so that'll be nice that it actually has an impact. Now, joint combat, or instant action as it's formerly named, that's again going to support medium-sized fights, which is good. As I said, is where PlanetSide shines. Now, one of the small snippets of this was that allied vehicle spawns, spare gunner slots or passenger slots in those are going to be available, and that was suggested by Serious Gaming recently. I think that's a really nice idea, and in his video he was talking about it improving the flow of battle, and it definitely will, because it will give people the opportunities to get into the fight at the front line, hopefully. I'll talk more about that later in my suggestions though. Wave spawns is the next thing I'm going to touch on, and I mean, for starters, it's going to support teamwork. I mean, just naturally, as you're going to get a wave of people pushing out of the spawn room, they will at the very least appear to be together. Now, they may not be even coordinating or talking amongst themselves, but anybody that's trying to stop them, spawn campers and the like, will have more targets to shoot at, and that'll mean that it's harder for them, so spawn camping will become less of an issue. Now, I've wanted this in PlanetSide since I first played the game, because I'd originally seen this system in Return to Castle Wolfenstein. It worked really, really well, and it did support teamwork, and it made spawn camping harder. And I am really excited that it's got the potential of getting into PlanetSide 2 now. Now, with wave spawning, it should make, as I said, spawn camping harder, and it will support teamwork, or at least some semblance of it. Now, I would like to see it rolled out for Sunderers as well, and perhaps even drop pods, because it gives you this back and forth, this lulls and points of kind of intensity in the fight, and it's all about logistics, as Malone said back in his PlanetSide 1 manifesto, and it should make things a lot better, if you ask me. Now I'm going to really dive into the suggestions now. Now, with this spawn system, spawn revamp, I think it's really good, but I think that there is a key missed opportunity, and that missed opportunity is to drastically improve the flow of battle between one base and the next. Now, recently I suggested that when the last spawn point in area for a faction is lost, so within a certain radius, then automatically a wave of drop pods are launched with accompanying support pods, so they're spawn tubes, equipment terminals, potentially defences, shield generators, all sorts of things, and these would drop in, say, 200 metres or so away from the previous spawn point that had just been lost, be it a base capture point, base spawn room, or a attacker sunder, or something similar. Now this 200 metre away point would be along the direction of the lattice line, so it automatically pulls the fight out into the field. Now, this would reduce the necessity for player-organised spawns, which is a major failing of PlanetSide 2. There is too much reliance on players themselves bringing up Sunderers, but then also too much reliance on that Sunderer staying alive for the fight to keep going. Now, what this will do is it will tease the fights out into the field. It will mean that there's less downtime between fights, which obviously is when people log off or move to another lattice lane and the flow of battle fails. And overall, this could be fantastic. And the flow of battle is one of the biggest problems, if you ask me, about PlanetSide 2. It fails so often in a play session, and I find myself hitting the redeploy key far too often. I want to go through an entire play session without having to hit that key once. I want to just fight my way across a front line and push that front line backwards and forwards in my play session. I don't want to be bouncing 1,000, 2,000 meters across the entire fight just to find one that's good and is sustainable. I want every fight to be sustainable, and that's what I hope by using this system it will support. Now, the next thing I'm going to mention is that a lot of the language and a lot of the terms in this document are about supporting allied territory and defensive fights and defensive markers. What I think we should do is we should try and move away from thinking of only people spawning in their own territory. I think we should try and make sure that people can spawn wherever the front line is. Now, that could well be in enemy territory if the front line is pushed out of your territory into the next, and if reinforcements are needed there, you should be able to spawn directly there, rather than having to spawn in the base behind and then move across or redeploy so you can spawn to the Sunderer. Now, I want to see the offensive markers being able to increase the population in that territory rather than just defensive. Maybe this is just an oversight in this document, but that seems like a very natural thing. Now, that again will just help to keep the flow of battle going, and it should make things better. Now, one of the core criticisms in the Revamp design documents Reddit thread is about the fact that population balance is not always actually population balance, because in a lot of cases you get the population that's actually going on around the capture point itself, but then you've also got fights way out in the field, perhaps at construction bases, and if you're factoring that in, then it's not necessarily making things fairer. Now, what I suggest, and has been suggested by many other people before, is that you only consider the population balance in a radius around that particular spawn point. What that would do is it would mean that you are only factoring in those people that are actually around that spawn point, so it will make the balance fairer, and it'll make the systems that are in this design revamp more effective. Now, another point of contention is the fact that you talk about population balance, that's all well and good, but if you've got, say, 20 people and they're in heavy assaults or medics or engineers, like infantry classes, and then you've got another 20 people, well, it's a balanced fight. Unless, of course, those other 20 people are all in maxes, or in aircraft shelling the point, whatever else it may be. Now, there was a proposal a while back by Mustari who suggested that we use something called effective force. Now, what that would do is it would factor in what you can arguably call force multipliers into the population balance equation, and that would then be what's used for the 55% cutoff points for things. Now that would again make things better balanced, and so again making things fairer and fights more sustainable. Now another thing that some players were suggesting recently was that restricting the fight's total population is good for a number of things, but some bases are better at supporting larger player numbers than others. Obviously with the facilities, the actual AMP station tech plant and the biolab, they will support much larger fights than, say for example, TI Alloys, because TI Alloys is a smaller base, it's got one capture point rather than 2 or 3, and it takes up a smaller area. Now also you've got 3-point bases across the maps where you've got these convergence of lattice lines, so you're naturally going to get more people funneled into them. Now what I suggest is that rather than it being a flat cut-off at 48 or 96 players, depending on whether that's friendly or total population, is that you have a modifier depending on what type of base it is. If it's a 3-point base or a major facility, then perhaps it would automatically be 48 players greater than the small outposts, and that would support the large fights that a lot of people play the game specifically for. I mean, that's the game's main selling point, but it also then makes the fights smaller at the bases that can't support them. So now that should make the quality of the fights much better, and it should mean that a better experience is had by all. Now to bring this video to a close, I just want to say that I'm really looking forward to these changes. I think they're going to make a huge impact on the game. However, more could be done to support the flow of battle and balance fights more effectively. Now please comment if you've got any other suggestions or counter arguments, and I look forward to reading them. See you on Araxis.